welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, September 8th, and I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we're going to head over to Alan, where he's going to sit down with Asaf Ezra, co-founder and CEO at Granulate, where they're going to talk about Granulate's new and free Kubernetes cost optimization solution, gMaestro. Alan will then talk to G. Rittenhouse, CEO at Sky-High Security, where G will update Techstrong TV on what Sky-High Security has in store post-McAfee and speak to a variety of tech trends and issues. We then go to Open Source Summit, where Alan met with Amir Montazeri, co-founder of the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund, to talk about the fund, which was designed to make open source more secure without disrupting open source project maintainers. Then we're joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on and tell us more about some of the upcoming webinars we have in store for you. We then go to Mitch, where he sits down with Prakash Satharaman, CISO at CloudBees, as the two explore DevSecOps and strategies CISOs can use to take advantage of the immersive security and software experience, as well as talk about the upcoming DevOps World 2022. Mitch will then talk to David DeSanto, Vice President of Product at GitLab, where David will tell us about GitLab's findings in its 6th annual DevSecOps survey. We then have 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first, Mike meets with Peter Newton, Senior Director of Product and Solutions for Fortinet, where Peter explains why zero-trust approaches to securing IT have finally come of age. Then Mike interviews NetRise co-founder and CEO Thomas Pace, as Thomas explains why congressional bills that ban CVEs from software is not a good idea. That's what we have coming for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get this show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for September 8th. First up, Google has urged users on all operating systems to update Google Chrome as soon as possible. Google recently released a Chrome update to patch a significant vulnerability that is actively being exploited in ongoing cybersecurity attacks. The vulnerability involved a collection of backend libraries called Mojo, which are used by many Chromium-based browsers. If you haven't updated your recent version of Chrome, then Google recommends you do so immediately. Next, the United States government announced that they will send $1 billion of federal grants for manufacturing, clean energy, farming, biotech, and other technologies. The 21 companies were chosen from the initial 529 applicants for grants from last year's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. Unlike the pandemic aid, though, these new set of grants are meant to revitalize parts of the country that need help. These grants would be the largest ever for local economic development provided by the Commerce Department. The U.S. has stated that the grants will be provided over the course of 5 years and will end up creating over 100,000 new jobs. In other news, KeyBank reported that hackers stole personal data from home mortgage holders in a breach of a third-party vendor. The information that hackers stole included social security numbers, addresses, and account numbers. According to KeyBank, the hackers obtained the information back in July after getting into the computers of an insurance provider, as it became aware of it in August. That being said, though, KeyBank did not state how many customers this breach has affected, but the total number could be quite large, as KeyBank operates in 15 states and is close to $200 billion in assets. Next up, a group of telecommunication providers has dropped its bid to overturn one of the strictest internet privacy laws in the United States. In 2020, Maine created one of the strongest rules for internet service providers that stops them from using, disclosing, or selling access to customers' personal information without their consent. Some of the biggest telecommunication providers immediately sued a claim, arguing that it violated their First Amendment rights. But the group only recently filed to dismiss the lawsuit. With this dismissal, this marks a move where other states can now follow Maine's lead to create stricter privacy laws. Next, the Federal Trade Commission announced that they are investigating Amazon's $3.9 billion acquisition of One Medical. Both One Medical and Amazon received requests for additional information during an FTC review of the merger. Amazon originally announced plans to buy One Medical in July, and the deal was meant to help push Amazon into healthcare. This is following after Amazon's recent shutdown of its Amazon Care home health service. Critics of the sale argue that it will expand the company's already huge market power. Taking a step back, though, this is amidst an already ongoing FTC investigation involving Amazon's Prime setup, sign-up, and cancellation practices. On Security Boulevard, we have an article that looks at the community's reactions to a report that states that TikTok was hacked. Blue Hornet, a notorious leak group, said that TikTok was hacked with over 2 billion records stolen, but TikTok denies such claims. With all this confusion, we look at some of what community's experts have to say about this. To learn more, go to Security Boulevard. On DevOps.com, we have an article looking at how the NSA and CISA published a set of DevSecOps best practices based on the Enduring Security Framework, or ESF. The ESF was created in response to the SolarWinds software supply chain breach. However, these best practices take the ESF.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to a Techstrong TV interview. My guest today is Asaf Ezra. He's CEO of Granulate. Asaf has been on our show and in person with me before, so it's a pleasure to have him back on. Hello, Asaf. Well, it's afternoon for you. Good afternoon. How's it going?
Good afternoon, Alan, or good morning. It's always a pleasure to be here.
It's nice to have you on. Asaf, for folks who may not be familiar with you or Granulate, why don't you give them a little quick background on yourself and the company?
Sure thing. So my co-founder and I have founded Granulate about 4 years ago. The company's main goal was to create what we call the self-managing workloads. We started from the optimizations within the VM itself, so anywhere from the kernel stack all the way up to the runtime. And from then on out, we moved into two different spaces. One was through a profiler. We aim to give customers the ability to use a free open source continuously monitoring profiler to optimize their own code, something that Granulate, without the prior knowledge of what the business application is, would never do. And on the other hand, how to utilize performance optimizations, or in this case, a lot of it comes from the just innate overhead of over-provisioning. And so you have a full stack from your own code all the way to the infrastructure level, starting with Kubernetes and expanding to VMs and data centers, as well as cloud installations.
Excellent. Very, very good. And actually, before we even go further, let's tell people right now, if they want to get information on Granulate, the website?
Granulate.io, an Intel company now for the past 4 months.
That's good, and congratulations on that as well. All right. Now that we've kind of laid that foundation, let's talk about today's news, Asaf. I'm going to let you share it with our audience. I'm sorry. And go ahead, have at it.
Sure thing. So when we started talking to more and more customers running Kubernetes, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that it has become the de facto standard for orchestration in the cloud. And we've seen in more and more customers the case of it's nice to see an optimization, but I have an innate over-provisioning where I'm requesting from Kubernetes an X amount of CPUs or an X amount of memory for my container, where I'm actually utilizing about 30, 40% and targeting about 60% for the autoscaler. So for a lot of customers, that innate over-provisioning and the inability to dynamically change resource requests and limits, that alone ended up sometimes with over-provisioning of about 40 to 60%. We've seen actually even higher cases. So right now, for those customers that are inherently over-provisioning, we want to give them the free version, which is take the insights across all of your clusters, tell us what the buffer that you want to keep. We start by the default at 30% because you know what? Sometimes you're bursting, sometimes things can change. So the default would be 30% and the age of the workload that you want to look at. So this could be a whole week if you're saying, you know what? I have this tremendous change over a whole week, or you know what? You're going to say over the course of 5 minutes, this is the traffic characteristics that I'm seeing, not necessarily the max traffic that I'll see at night or on the weekend, but the traffic characteristics will remain the same. So I can take that as a good representation of what would happen at max workload. And then we'll give you the new recommendations. You can apply them directly to a running cluster. It will initiate a rollout, a gradual rollout of the new requests, or you can take the YAML code, put it back to your GitHub, and you'll have your one source of truth. The next version, which is coming in about 2 weeks, would allow you to let Granulate automatically change that through a write permissions. Right now, all you need are read permissions. And the next version, you'll be able to add write permissions to allow the automatically apply from the UI itself. And we're also going to add the ability to create a pull request directly to your GitHub based on the YAML.
Excellent. So this is really important stuff for folks who know, right? For people who know about Kubernetes deployment and provisioning, this is, very, very matter of fact. Wow, what a great thing. For folks who don't know, though, let's kind of explain it to them. One of the advantages of cloud, of course, is the burstability, the elasticity. And the idea is you really should only pay for what you use, right? But if you need more, it's available to you. Well, in practice, that sounds great as an ideal. But in practice, what often happens is you need to provision for elasticity. You need to provision, if you're going to be having a burst, some sort of peak usage, you need to provision to be able to handle that. And, in a perfect world, we would be constantly moving that provisioning based upon what we are anticipating in usage. And as you said, you want to leave 30%, 20%, whatever, right, overhead in case you exceed your estimates. But what happens in real life is a lot of people set it and forget it, right? They set their provisioning and we have so many different instances running and clusters and everything else. No one remembers to go back. And so it's kind of like, the marks on the tide at high water. You have your high water marks, but very few people ever go back down and move off that high water mark. And it's a problem. So go ahead.
That is absolutely part of it. We see the cloud like what you say. The cloud should be here for the speed, for the velocity of the developers. We want the engineers to be as fast as they can. But we also added some complexities. First of all, like you said, the it's not a perfect world. You cannot provision a machine and it'll be instantly ready. You sometimes have to load data, you have to load your application, you have to load your container. Those things take time. That's why you set the target at about 60, let's say 80, 70%. So you have to be ready when that happens. And who is the one who's setting all of these percentages? You have your developers, your engineers, your DevOps, your SRE team, and all of these functions expect to have a different goal. Sometimes your SRE team will be the one who's managing the production, but the one who's provisioning the resource request for containers would be the engineer who wrote the application. So the engineer has an interest that the container would just run. So he would or she would sometimes over provision just in case, why not? And the SRE team wants to make sure that everything is fully up 100% of the time, or let's say 5 nines. And so they have very similar interests that it's better to, let's say, pay a little extra, but don't have that pager duty call them at 3 a.m. because you have out of memory, for example, or you don't have enough containers. And so all of a sudden, you have your cloud costs that are way, way, way over what you imagined. And not necessarily the right people are responsible for those requests and limits. Because if I'm an SRE team that is responsible only for the production, how do I know that the change that I'm making for the resource requests is actually legitimate? And I'm not going to create a pager duty call to the engineering team all of a sudden, or even to my own teammates. So all of a sudden you have this miscommunication, or because the responsibility is not shared between both teams. So what you have is this great, like you said, great idea for a perfect world where you could just elastically grow and come back down. But you also need to create those governing policies to allow you to make sure that you don't do it irresponsibly, and to allow you to find those gaps and automatically remediate them when you can, because it wouldn't hurt the SLA in the end. And this is basically what we're trying to give the organization. And we believe it should be free because you're not going to change the resource requests and limits every day. At most, if you deploy a new version or there was a change in traffic characteristics, you might need to change it a little bit. But we believe that this would not be every, let's say, day for every deployment. Sometimes you have a daily deployment. Usually it's not for the same service. So the Kubernetes service. So you'll have a deployment set that is updated once today, a different one tomorrow, and maybe then you'll need new recommendations. So that's why we believe it should be free. And that's why we believe that people should be able to take it back to their GitHub for their own single source of truth, where the engineers could also see the changes that have been made. And it's not some drift that you have in production.
Excellent. Great description. So, Asaf, let's just talk business for people who say, hey, this sounds great. I want to try it out. How do they go about to, let people know? How do they get started here?
So you can either put Gmaestro in Google or go to granulate.io to Gmaestro. You have a free sign-up page. It just requests you to, like every other website, to choose your username. And then you'll be able to deploy it as a single pod deployment set in your cluster. And then from there on out, you choose the buffer, you choose the age. The defaults are 5 minutes and 30%. And you'll get those recommendations on a per cluster basis. We also do that according to the highest impact, obviously. So we already have really good examples with customers. Some of them are seeing in a single cluster, sometimes 6 and 7 digits and on an annual basis.
Really?
Because the clusters are huge. Yeah.
That's huge, is right.
And, it sounds pretty easy. I mean, look, you think this is a 30-minute setup? 60
I would
minutes?
imagine it's even less. And the walkthrough is pretty much immediate because the first screen that you see is setting those headroom and age. And after that, you have all the recommendations in front of you.
Excellent. And now, this is for Kubernetes clusters wherever they run. Makes no difference, AWS, Google, Microsoft, or even bare metal, maybe in your own data center?
Yeah. So we have some customers who are running their own managed Kubernetes locally in their data center. We have some federated clusters across clouds. The let's say neat thing is it's all based on the Kubernetes API. So you don't have to rely on certain infrastructure.
That's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
The abstraction layer is amazing.
Excellent. So Asaf, we mentioned before, it's galvanize.io, and this is galvanize.io, and just look on there for gmaestro. We are already gearing up for KubeCon, Cloud Native Con in Detroit in October. We'll be there live at Techstrong TV. Will Granulate be there?
I would hope so.
I don't know.
I would like to see us in every KubeCon that we can make, live or not. But yeah, definitely.
All right, so if you want to see it maybe in person in October in Detroit as well, you could go. Just want to make sure this is live right now on the website. People can go sign up for free right now.
Yep. Just like I said, granulate.io or gmaestro on Google.
Fantastic. Asaf, sounds like this is a great offering. Man, thank you. Thank you to the whole Granulate team. This is the kind of stuff I think people will really flock to because, look, the whole FinOps thing, right, with people trying to control cloud costs and everything else is mushrooming. People, everyone's recognizing. And with so much, as you said, with so much of the new development, new workloads going on cloud being kube-based, this almost kind of falls into that FinOps thing where you can really, get a handle on what you got here and try to be smart about what you spent. Fantastic. Congratulations on the Intel move, which we've covered, and hope to see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you very much, Alan.
All right, Asaf Ezra of Granulate here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. We had an interview last week. It aired last week with G. Rittenhouse, who's the CEO of Sky High Security. Some of you, I'm hoping many of you know already a little bit of the Sky High Security story, who they are. This is not your average security startup. And but if you haven't, I do recommend, especially if you're watching this on Techstrong.tv, you can scroll down to past interviews and you can catch the first interview with G on there, and that might give you a little bit of the background. For those of you who choose not to do so, though, I am going to ask G to kind of start off with a little bit of a foundational background on Sky High and himself, but it'll be shorter than the previous interview. Anyway, all that out of the way, G, welcome back. Thanks for coming back on Techstrong TV.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to meet with you and the team.
Fantastic, and it's good to have you on. So, G, as I mentioned, for those who maybe are a little too busy today to go back and look at the last interview, give them a quick synopsis of the Sky High story and maybe a little bit of your own background.
Yeah, sure. So Sky High started by really focusing on data, the data layer kind of security. At its heart, security is a data problem and protecting that data. And so as data really went from the data center into SaaS and cloud and applications, Sky High was formed to solve that problem, whether it's on the web, in the cloud, or in SaaS. We launched the company formally this year. Previously, it was acquired by McAfee, and we started out. I joined as the CEO at launch. I come from a very long background in technology and security and cloud software. So I really did look for the opportunity to take the company out into the environment by itself and serve our customers better.
Absolutely. Just in way of background, I actually knew the original founding team from SkyHigh that was acquired by McAfee. Smart people. I thought they had great product. Then they kind of got acquired by McAfee. And it's hard navigating currents.
Yeah.
I think this was McAfee, might have still been owned by Intel. I'm not even sure anymore. But it was a big ocean. And I'm glad to see it emerge now and really back to its mission, which was at its roots.
Yeah, and in addition to that, what ends up happening is, as you well know, security in the security industry is all about innovation, and in particular, focused innovation around data and how to protect that. And so when you're in a broader environment, some of that gets diluted over time. And so by bringing it out, we're able to continue to focus on the roadmap and bring that innovation into the marketplace, which the customers really appreciate.
Absolutely. Large conglomerates like that are not usually innovation centers. Enough said. Let's focus though. So, as it's September. I can't believe how quick this year is flying by. It's September already, and as we look at kind of the horizon, we continue to see digital transformation, whether it's driven by COVID or not. It's a whole nother story. But we see digital transformation driving so much to the cloud, right, from the data center. It's really accelerated by years, the amount of data moving to the cloud. At the same time, I think we've seen a re-emphasis on the importance of data. Right? It's about the data, right? We focus on the applications and the infrastructure and the identity and access controls and all of these things. But really, as you mentioned, so much of security is about data. I'm interested, G, where do you see the market? Where do you see, where we've come from? And again, not long term, because who can see that far? But, where do you see us now and in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you said, the cloud is changing everything for the most part. But in many cases, our security approach as an industry really remained the same. It's still getting packets to the right place, making sure they're the right packets. And we've simply moved those functions from on-prem appliances into cloud and cloud native functions and called it something new. But the basic construct is still the same. What we see now and continued, I think we're still pretty much in the early stages, is that this becomes really problematic. You start to focus on individual technologies, whether it's the endpoint or a gateway or a firewall or any number of different things, when, to your earlier point, it's all about the data. And so what ends up happening is you have all of these disparate technologies, each with their own policies and events and logs and whatnot. And you try to stitch them together to provide a coherent view of what you're trying to protect, the data. And what we find and what we see resonating with our customers is to just flip this on its head. If you want to protect the data, put the policy and enforcement and events around that data, regardless of the underlying technology. And so by focusing on that, you can really simplify what you're trying to do. And so whether it's in the cloud, on-prem, on a device, mobile, all these things really are secondary when you focus and have that data first kind of view of security.
I agree with you. And quite frankly, I sit in a unique place. I get to talk to a lot of people. And I see us focusing on data, and it's good that we focus on the data. But there's so many aspects of securing data, right? There's the obvious data at rest and data in motion and encryptions and all of that. But there's also who has access to what data, who has the ability to extract data, who, from a whole compliance perspective, which is like a whole nother thing, right? How do we keep what data and all of these things? I think to a lot of people out here, especially our non-security folks, our developers and DevOps folks and cloud native folk, data and security seem like such big domains. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? How do you get your arms wrapped around that, your head wrapped around it?
Yeah, so I think when we look at it through that lens, one of the kind of modern approaches to security is something called the zero trust framework, which basically means that as a user, I'm not going to have access to everything just because I'm associated with a network or a group or a device or whatnot. I'm going to just have access to what's required of me to be successful in my job. So I'm going to start with zero trust and kind of build from there. We normally think about that through the lens of access and access to applications. But as a developer, you can also think about it as you only have access to the part of the code base that you're responsible for, that you don't have access to the entire code base, because if you were owned by some phishing or whatnot, that would give the perpetrator access to the entire thing instead of a very narrow one. We extend that to the enterprise and we extend it to users as well. But one of the key elements that where we've extended this principle is not just having access to that code or that data or that information, but how it's actually used. So where most people restrict just the access, we go further and say, what are you allowed to do with it once you have access to that? And we call that data aware, but basically it's extending the zero trust formalism into usage as well. And so, yes, developers see this all the time. You can't just publish code. It has to get reviewed and approved before you publish it. You can't just download the code because the whole repository. You can only take pieces that you're allowed to do. And so these kind of things, even if you're not a security professional, you can recognize some of the good processes and approaches that we use in security as just good hygiene, even for code and development.
Excellent. I agree with you. And, I think zero trust is, if you went to RSA this past year, that was the main theme of RSA conference. And so zero trust is something I think people are starting to understand the necessity of. It's funny. Sometimes security people get a bad rap, G, right? Because, yes, developers understand. No, we do, though. Developers understand that, just as you said. But when it's the security people telling the developer they can't do it, then it's like, oh, those rotten security people, they're always saying no, they're always slowing me down, right? And so there is, I mean, it's gotten better with the whole advent of DevSecOps and everything. There's more cooperation. But there's still some of that goes on there. From where you sit, how do you see this playing out over the next, short-term to longer-term thing? Is it building on that? Is there anything else on the horizons that you guys are already starting new,
So I think you summarized the problem really well by saying, look, developers want to just push features and bring their innovation to market as quickly as possible. By the way, enterprises want to bring their goods and services to the market as quickly as possible. And historically, security has been viewed as a blocker because we want to put some control into that. And so the kind of next step of all of this, and one area that we've spent a lot of time and attention on, is to make it as simple as possible, that people can produce features and functions in a secure way without even really trying, because it's built into the pipeline, it's built into the methodology. And so as you get trained up in your particular pipeline with compliance and everything else, it's just part of it. So you can push the feature functionality quickly, but still do it in a way that is secure. We can look at those workloads and make sure that they're not vulnerable. And if they are, show you, or make sure that the posture is correct, or any number of different things in a way that if it's done easily and in an integrated way, does not slow down the innovation of an enterprise or of a developer.
Agreed. I saw an interesting article the other day about, they called it super cloud, but what they were really talking about is the amalgamation of all the different cloud providers into just one amorphous cloud, the cloud, right? Kind of, So, I mean, my wife's sister, for instance, thinks of the cloud as just a single place up there, the cloud. But it's almost true. That's kind of where we're heading. What is that? What are the implications of that for Sky High? Right? People don't care Amazon, Google, Microsoft. It's the cloud.
So we see this happening because of companies wanting to execute in different regions with different niche clouds, large clouds, et cetera. And so there is this thought around the super cloud of abstracting out all of this to have one orchestration layer or one load balancer or whatever. And that's pretty tough to do because these clouds are purpose-built for compute, memory, and networking. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of feature functionality. But one of the kind of common topics across all of this is security. Because from a security perspective, each one of these large cloud providers, while they have a lot of depth, they're different between the two. And attackers can exploit the fact that there's these differences and gaps in your security profile. So if you're able to abstract out your security profile to cover all of them, then you have an advantage. And so this is exactly why we built a platform and why we integrate in with not just clouds, but as I said before, endpoints and SaaS and everything else, because that is the model, so that you have one view of what your data is doing and where it is, irregardless of what particular cloud it's in or what infrastructure it's on. And so by being able to, security is one of the really powerful use cases of this abstraction provided by the super cloud. rather than just the compute and memory and networking pieces of it.
Agreed. Gee, we're almost out of time, but what else do you have to share? And don't say anything that's going to get us all in trouble, but what does Sky High have up their sleeve, maybe before the end of the year or right after the year?
Yeah, so as we execute this year, it's all been around some of our key products in the portfolio, a CASB or a web gateway. We see more and more customers, though, as we start to go on that maturity curve, start to expand across the platform and really start to take advantage of some of the things that we were talking about so that they can have a holistic view of their security and really start to reduce the attack surface around the cloud and whatnot by applying these zero trust frameworks.
Yep. Zero trust. All right. G. Rittenhouse, thanks so much for coming back on. I appreciate your time. You know what we didn't mention? People who want to go check out more about Sky High Security, the website.
There you go, skyhighsecurity.com.
Excellent. Hey, be well. Best of luck. Hope to see you again soon. Keep us posted.
Thank you, my friend.
Security.
Thank you, G.
Bye-bye.
All righty.
We're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, everyone. Wow, what a morning. I lost count, but we did a lot of great interviews, great conversations this morning. A lot of it, as we've been doing all week, has been around security. I think we're going to continue talking a little bit about security with our next guest here. Let me introduce you, and if I mess up his name, he'll correct me. Amir Montazeri.
That's right, Amir Montazeri, yes.
Montazeri, okay. Yeah, I've got that New York accent. But anyway, Amir, man, welcome. Welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yep. So, I guess we'll start with the obvious question of what brings you here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I co-founded OSTIF, the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund, which was designed to solve the classic problem in open source of how do we make open source more secure? How do we do it in a way that doesn't disrupt open source project maintainers and the great work that they do? And how do we do it in a way that's impactful? And so we started exploring this problem, and
So when did you start?
It would have been over 7 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was about 7 years ago. Some of the inspiration came from the CII, the Core Infrastructure Initiative, that was also attempting to solve this problem as well. And it's a very big and complex problem, so it needs all the help it can get.
A lot of hands.
Yes, and so since then we have honed in on a method for helping projects and the organizations that support those projects with auditing and improving security holistically, and we champion that audit process from start to finish. So a project can come to us and say, we want this project audited, and we get it done.
And what are you auditing it for? For security, for stability, viability?
Correct, mostly for security and sustainability. So a lot of research suggests that a lot of those deep-seated problems, vulnerabilities, and bugs aren't on the surface level when you look at the code. They are deep into the code. So deeper auditing, more logic review.
So you're really doing code audit then?
Correct.
Not auditing how many maintainers there are. Or
exactly.
Sort of like what Scorecard does at our last guest. This is really looking at the code and seeing how safe is the code, how secure is the code.
Exactly, yes. And so part of this process that we've developed and the method that we've developed is finding the best suited teams out there, folks from all around the world, audit teams from all around the world, finding the best suited ones, the most specialized ones that can do this kind of work. It's resulted in, it's been very successful. Thankfully, we've found over 40 critical or high risk vulnerabilities. These are those deep-seated problems that, when exploited in the wild, can cause headlines, cause those kind of things you read about.
Log4j stuff.
Log4Shell,
Right,
Heartbleed, all that good stuff. So we're going out and proactively finding these problems and fixing them, of course, because a great part of our method is not only finding these problems, but our auditors work with the maintainers to fix them as well.
Love it. I have a few questions on that. But
Yeah.
before we jump into that, I want to give our people at home, so it's Open Source
Technology
Improvement
Improvement
Fund.
Fund. Yes.
Where did they go on the web?
ostif.org.
That's what we were wanting. Okay. Now, I hear the word fund, and I'm thinking, well, maybe there's fundraising involved here.
Yes. So the fundraising typically comes from the organizations and foundations that are stewards of these open source projects, or kind of the supporters or maintainers of it.
So they pay you to perform this service.
Correct. Yes. And
Got it.
another a really nice thing about our method too is that instead of just working with one or two audit teams, we're able to actually go to a large number of them and effectively have them bid against each other as well. So we're able to do it for almost a third of the cost that kind of more traditional audits in this space cost.
That's great.
And by being that kind of that champion to manage this process, it makes the quality bar much higher as well of these reviews.
Got it. So let me go back to what we were talking about before. I wanted to just give people a sense right away that
Yeah,
they want to go
absolutely.
check this. You know, people, while they're listening, they'll go check the site out. But, you know, we find a deep-seated vulnerability, defect, whatever you want to call it. Come up with a way to fix it. So let's take sort of Struts 2 as an example. Okay, so now we fixed it, and we need to update to the new version in all the repositories out there where people download this open source code from. And not only do we need to update all those repositories, but we've got to somehow notify all of the people who have incorporated that code into their projects, into their applications. They're using it to, hey, we got a problem here, you need to update this. Right? It's one thing when we're talking about an OS, right? And you can kind of, hit people like that, or a phone app that you can do, but how do you do it?
So that's a great question.
That's a really great
that's a
question.
Very good question. I would say what we do to help with that is we really focus on transparency.
Yep.
So once all of the work is done, fixes have been made, they've been tested, we know that the fixes are in fact fixed. We put all of that into an audit report that is then published publicly for free for anyone to review. And we're also publishing those out onto the OpenSSF security reviews repo, which is a collection of these
That's
types
great.
of this
Yeah.
type of work to really get the word out there. And I think one of the biggest value adds that provides is being able to show the open source community at large what was done, how we fixed it, so that they can take that back to their teams and learn from them, serve as case studies, and really just raise the bar as a whole of open source security.
I love it. So it sounds to me that, look, the mission of your group is to undertake this audit, uncover if there's any kind of, vulnerability defects that we got to fix it, publish the fix, publish the background on it, and then we need the community, it sounds like, to get involved from that point on, and the users of, the consumers of this stuff, right? The old saying, you could lead the horse to water.
Exactly.
Right? But they need to go update and do their thing. Have you thought about maybe adding that aspect to the charter of your organization?
I don't think we have. No, we've been so hyper focused on.
Well, it's a big job. Right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
and
there's a lot of big jobs involved, unfortunately, in this whole thing.
indeed, yes. But part of I think why we've been so successful is focusing on solving the problem the way.
Right.
And,
this is what
and
you
this
guys
method.
do. Someone else tends to do that.
Exactly. But a couple great things that are happening are as there's more awareness in the space, there's more funding being put into security auditing and more attention being drawn to it. I'm hoping that will basically improve the landscape as a whole, and we can take lessons from what else is going on out in the space and incorporate that into our processes too.
Sure.
But I think by focusing, our focus really, I think, has led to our success in that, we'd had lots of folks early on say, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And while, we'll gladly take any feedback and advice, I think just being really hyper-focused on facilitating, executing on these audits, improving the software or the security posture, rather, of these projects, we've been able to be pretty successful.
Excellent. I want to pivot a little bit and ask you, look, you started this 7 years ago. There wasn't an open SSF then. Over the last, I guess it's been about 2 years now, a year and a half, we open SSF, from the Linux Foundation. How has the advent of the open SSF kind of helped, hurt, boosted, what effect has it had on your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say overall it's helped because, as you know, open source is largely relatively decentralized, and having a strong consortium of organizations, foundations, individuals who are focused on solving this problem, kind of giving them a platform or a forum to talk about this stuff has been really helpful. And I think another way OpenSSF has helped is by going out and actually doing some of the fundraising, getting more money into security, and more awareness, from both generally and in government as well, with the executive order responses.
Sure.
and those efforts.
It certainly brought a big spotlight
Yeah.
to the whole area, and we're a lot stronger together than we are individually. So I think that obvious.
Yes.
But there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg question here, which is, if not for the SolarWinds and some of these really high-profile software supply chain issues with OpenSSF and the whole open source software, market gotten the attention that it has, unfortunately, because of these things.
Right.
You obviously believe this was a problem 7 years ago, right? And you went out and did this. So this is not a new problem since whenever SolarWinds was, January. It was December.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, of 2021 or something, right? Or 20, one of them. I don't even remember. But 20. So this has been an ongoing problem. So certainly, right, sometimes things just come together, right? It's like fate. And it just, boom, it blows up. In many ways, you're one of the benefactors because you were here, kind of shouting in the wilderness, right?
Yes.
About this issue before it was, with the cool kids.
Yes.
Where do you see it going in the future?
Yeah. So I do think it's human nature to react, right? To be reactive, and I think largely what has been driving the progress made in the space has been reactive. And one thing that we're trying to do with our audits and with getting the word out about the work that we're doing is to try and shift to be more proactive, because we can, wait for the problems to happen, or we can proactively go out there and fix the problems. And so I hope that the focus shifts more towards proactive security as opposed to reactive security, And because the benefits of proactive security are, you don't see it as much. You know, when you prevent a problem from happening in the future that never happened, it's hard to attribute that to the action you took.
I get it.
But when something happens, like you scrape your knee or something, you have something very real that happens, you can react to it, you know, much stronger. So in general, I'd like the shift to focus more towards proactive security, which definitely seems to be where the OpenSSF and the organizations that are a part of OpenSSF seem to be going. And it's something that I would love to really help take the organization, take OpenSSF to the forefront of that, and really be one of the premier organizations in the world that is actually going out and proactively fixing problems.
Yeah, look, I think with the OpenSSF behind you, with it, you have every expectation of being able to do that, right? In fact, you should do that. But you know what? It's great, and it's look, on a personal level, I'm grateful to hear about people like you doing this before. You know, as I said, before the cool kids got involved, because we needed this. This isn't a problem since SolarWinds.
Yeah, and I think the beauty is especially now that it's more action is being called for, we have been doing this for 7 years now. So we had a lot of lessons learned.
Yep.
A lot of
idiot taxes paid.
Yes,
and you
exactly.
Do it
and
we've all
at
done
this
it.
point, we've gotten to a pretty good level where we are confident that we can do this. But as always, you know, open source in general is largely underfunded, and us as an organization, you know, we need funding as well, you know, to continue doing this, to scale up.
Oh, it's money.
Yeah, exactly. So to scale up even and to do more work that I know we're capable of doing. So hopefully, again, as more funding goes into the space as a whole, more funding goes into OpenSSF and other foundations doing this work, and us supporting those goals, I'm hoping more funding will come our way as well.
I hope so too. Hey man, thank you so much.
My
I'm
pleasure.
Here. Good. Keep up the great work.
Doing
We're
our
going to
best.
take a break here for lunch in Austin. I think we'll be back in about an hour.
Great.
Stay tuned. We are live here at Open Source Summit.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, man. That was great. Easy
Thanks.
peasy.
Yeah, that was fun.
All right.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hello again, everyone. Happy Thursday. Cody J. Brown here with some more programs happening next week at Techstrong Learning. So we are kicking off Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern with a DevOps.com panel on observability, monitoring, and analytics. So we brought in a swath of speakers from Chronosphere, Everbridge, and Fairwinds to navigate us through how to leverage observability platforms to help your IT teams more efficiently handle and identify issues before they become a major problem. Tuesday, September 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern, Fairwinds takes us into Kubernetes security guardrails. So there's a long list of things you need to do right to ensure the security of your Kubernetes environments. Guardrails can help you ensure that your entire team is consistently doing the right thing. And following on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, DevOps.com is hosting Keeping the Pulse of Your Data, Why You Need Data Observability. Our guests from Precisely will address the need for data observability, how it can prevent issues downstream, and why you should implement these practices now to prevent real-world issues. So that is all that I have for you right now, but we have plenty more of upcoming and on-demand programs for you here at Techstrong Learning, and we do have a full week of programs next week, so do come by. Everyone, have a great weekend.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
This is Techstrong TV.
Of the great pleasure of being joined by Prakash Setharama. Prakash is CISO, Chief Information Security Officer with CloudBees. Good to be talking with you again.
Good to be talking to you, Mitch. And alongside my day job as CISO for CloudBees, I also look after the product that we have called CloudBees Compliance. And it'll be great to talk about these two things in conjunction because a CISO's job is predominantly security, but security goes hand in hand with compliance. So we can talk about both topics.
Most certainly. Great. Well, let's talk about this in the context of DevOps world, because DevOps world, longstanding industry, kind of one of the best industry, if not the best conferences within the DevOps industry. It's, started as Jenkins World long ago. It's happening, September 27th through the 29th in Orlando. I'll actually be there. But let's look at it from a security perspective. Why do security people care about a DevOps conference, like DevOps world? Let's start there.
That's a brilliant question. I think there's two parts to it. Why do they care about it today? Maybe they don't. But rather the question should probably, why should they care about it?
Why should they?
There is a phenomenal reason why they should care about DevOps world. If you think about how our jobs as security professionals has evolved, initially it was mainly about infrastructure security. It was about perimeter security and device security and things like that. We've become quite good at that stuff now. If you look across the globe, we're pretty good at it. In most medium to large organizations, perimeter security, etc., is quite robust. The challenge we have is that the threat landscape has changed. The threat vectors have changed. And where it is now is predominantly the software landscape that is a threat, and how we build applications, how we build and deliver and deploy software is more of a problem than how do we protect networks. And, increasingly in a world where your ability to compete in the industry is based on how good your teams are at delivering software. And this is regardless of whether you're a tech company or a company making and selling bread. Technology is here to stay, and it kind of determines the success of your business. The application development teams and the engineers who work in that space become your customers, your frontline customers. Yes, your business will always be a customer, but they are going to increasingly use the tools you provide, the capabilities your teams provide to the organization at large. We're better to meet the best and the brightest of the application development engineering community than DevOps world. If they are the customers of your future, come to where they congregate, come to where they exchange ideas, where they demonstrate how their life is evolving and how they are making big differences to the organizations they serve. What are their impediments? What do they consider friction? And if we put all those together, why wouldn't you be there?
Actually, I very much agree. It isn't just about putting people in the same room together. It's about talking about just like we talked about, how do we build networks and make them secure? Why wouldn't we have the conversation about how do we build software and how do we make it secure, right? We don't ask the car manufacturers to go add airbags after the car is shipped off the floor, right? Or build in a crunch zone into that car to make it a little safer after we've, landed at my driveway. It's got to be part of the process in building it in, but you have to understand how it's made, the process. And by the way, it's just like security is going rapidly down its ever-changing path. Software, DevOps, et cetera, is also rapidly changing. So you really have to kind of bring them together and work together on how you make it secure.
Yeah. And I do think as a profession, we have a huge responsibility to change the perceived reputation of security and compliance teams, et cetera. We play a very important role in protecting the organization. At the same time, for the engineering community, we are often seen as a department of slow. So we have a big job ahead of us to try and meet these stakeholders, get to understand them, get them to understand what we bring to the table, and help them realize that sometimes what they consider friction is necessary. And at the same time, understand what we can do as a profession to reduce friction at the front line of innovation. Friction and innovation are kind of antithesis to each other. You cannot tell the organization, can you innovate rapidly? And then say, yeah, but every time you want to innovate, we're going to have 25 hurdles you need to jump through. And, so it helps us as a profession mature into this phrase we all love to use called DevSecOps. But yet nobody has actually managed to explain to me succinctly, lucidly, what do we mean by DevSecOps really? Why is the sec kind of sitting in between dev and ops? It shouldn't. It should just be DevOps. Security and compliance should be transparent to those people because they want to go from development into operations in 24-hour cycles, not 24-month cycles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is sort of, there isn't one definition or one understanding. I think everyone's trying to understand what DevSecOps is, what that means to them. I think to your point is as security professionals, you can either look at it as how do we prevent people from doing dumb things, unsecure software getting released, or you can look at it as how do we help the organization release secure software faster. And just that perspective change can radically change how you interface, integrate with, collaborate with, work on the development tool chain, the security tool chain that helps create secure software. I think that's maybe part of what that perspective is that you can get by immersing yourself into an environment where you're going to be with people who are doing DevOps.
Absolutely. And that has to be, if you look at the agenda for DevOps World this year, there are many sessions and many themes and mainly by practitioners in the field, customers talking about how are they solving this problem, focused predominantly on how do you deal with security in high frequency deployment scenarios. If you're deploying once a year, security isn't as much of a pain as if you're deploying every day or every hour, etc. And these are real customers who have solved the problem or who are facing the problem, asking for advice. And as security people and as CISOs, specifically CISOs, because they set the tone for how their departments integrate within the wider organization, for CISOs to be there and understand their customer base, I think is absolutely critical. They will find it extremely valuable listening to customers who have solved the problem and how their security departments helped, the engineering community get better, get ahead, and real life case studies always help set the tone and set a pattern.
Just familiarizing myself, and as I mentioned, I'll be there as well. Just looking at the agenda, one of the big topics at this year's DevOps World is supply chain security, software supply chain security. I think there's about 20 different talks on that. That alone, to me, is a topic worth exploring. Plus, getting into how that fits into the entire DevOps process and working with developers and that. Any perspective on that, Prakash?
Yes, and I think it's from Cloudbee's perspective, we worked with the software supply chain for a decade now, and now philosophy throughout has been it's about the ecosystem. Security is increasingly about the ecosystem, not point in place, point in time, point in process kind of security. It cannot be an afterthought, as you said. Cars landed on the driveway and it has no airbags. Somebody turns up 3 days later to try and fit airbags into it. It cannot be like that. It has to be secure by design right through. I think the dimension of software supply chain security that's become so critical and so paramount, and it's become critical to the point of it being a national security topic that the governments are talking about, is because everything is so fundamentally interwoven and the complexity is beyond human comprehension at this point. We have to find a way to automate security checking. We have to reduce the noise and the friction that all the scanners cause as a part of that ecosystem. And more important, if we're going to get shift left done right, we have to make sure that for the person writing the software, we are not inundating them with, we said shift left, so here are 3,000 more things for you to look at. It has to be, we've done all the homework we need to do. Here are 3 things we need you to fix so that what you're writing is secure by design. Okay? Mm-hmm. And because that supply chain, especially, I rarely see enterprise customers and enterprise engineering teams write more than 30 or 40% of the application code. Most of it is third-party software. A lot of it is open source software. Mm-hmm. And we've got used to the situation where we don't really think about the third-party packages we use and the security vulnerabilities they introduce, etc. And it's arguable that we don't want them to think about it that way. There should be something, a fabric that is running real time that makes sure that they don't have to think every time they use something. We don't get in a car and think whether the airbag is going to work or not. We just trust that it works because there's some systems behind the car that make sure that they always work when you need them. Security should be exactly like that. It should be a transparent fabric, and that's what we need to work towards.
I think for me, my kind of working definition of DevSecOps is it's not just shifting the work left. It's not having developers do more security. Yes, sure, we'd like them to emphasize developing secure code. But you mentioned one of the key words is automation. It's building security into the design, but also into the tool chain, into the workflows that happen across DevOps. That's how you're going to ship secure software, not by, at the end, let's go check the bill of materials and see if there might be any problems, any vulnerabilities in what we shipped kind of late, right? We want those things to be ferreted out. We want that to be part of the process that so we don't have to think about it, right? We know, okay, this log4j vulnerability is out, right? We have that where in our software. Great. Before we ship it, let's patch these and fix it in any code that's moving out next, or our own vulnerabilities for that matter. That to me is kind of the most effective way to think about DevSecOps. Yeah. Does that resonate with you too?
Yes, it does. And for a bulk of it, that is, the primary goal we need to hit with DevSecOps. I think there are associated kind of topics we need to really consider now so that it's not, again, a problem we're dealing with 3 years from now. Security and compliance go hand in hand. I think, to a large degree, we've got used to saying, I have a process, I have a pipeline, and it's, when I checked it 3 years ago, it was fit for purpose. Therefore, it must be fit for purpose now. We talk about continuous authority to operate or continuous path to live and all these nice phrases. The reality is point-in-time checking of a process is no longer I think fit for purpose, especially for regulated enterprises or, medium to large complex enterprises. It's not enough. It's necessary, but it's not enough. What we really need to start thinking about is, as an organization, what is the risk we are really exposed to? What is my risk appetite? And all these various pipelines that are running automatically, through the day, deploying code into our production environments, how are they really changing my risk envelope and my risk appetite? Am I within that risk appetite? So increasingly becomes a question of risk, not just the individual CVE that we might have seen, because a CVE only says under certain conditions, it might be severe and you really need to worry about it. But in a large number of cases, we have mitigating environment controls, we have mitigating organizational controls, etc., which bring the risk down. If we try to respond or got our engineers to respond to every single thing that says, this looks like high, they will forever be chasing their tails. They're not really going to get any application software done. So that bit about risk, the conversation about risk, and am I complying with the policies and the rules that the organization has? Am I able to demonstrate day by day that my systems and my controls are effective? Because the worst thing is having controls and not knowing whether they're effective or not, because that gives you a false sense of security. Are they effective? Are my preventative controls effective? And the last bit, at any point in time, if we have an audit, can I assert an evidence that when I say I'm effective, here's the evidence for it? So we don't start an audit conversation with, can all the engineering teams please provide me 30 PowerPoint slides telling me all the metrics of all the scanning you did? That's a waste of everybody's time, really, because in the day and age of automated build, testing, scanning, deployments, asking engineering teams to produce metrics and spreadsheets is like Stone Age. We shouldn't be doing that. It should be real time. We have the signals. We should be able to judge risk in real time and provide the evidence everybody needs in real time. So that's the aim.
And that data is being generated, being created in real time as they're doing the work, right? So it isn't like, let's wait till some point in time. Like you said, point in time is old, you can't think of it that way. It's a continuous process. Now you have insight directly into what's happening, right? And are you complying? And that data is available through automation and the DevOps tool chain. You know what? Thinking about going to a conference, if I'm not steeped in DevOps, but I want to understand this better, I'm a CISO, security professional. You know, there are lots of topics there that you are going to be familiar with. You're going to hear about things like credential security and how you manage that in a software supply chain and in a workflow process. So you're not, exposing credentials and secrets in the development process. It's how to manage risk in an agile type environment where things are changing very quickly. And it also is topics like securing containers, securing Kubernetes and environments where we're running cloud native software. So there'll be some new topics, but it's in the context of security. I think it'll feel very comfortable, but also enlightening to get that perspective.
Yes. And what I find really valuable in these conversations is things that I probably take for granted. Of course, it's, that's common sense. In my world, day to day, minute by minute, is common sense. And then you turn up here and you realize that there is a completely different perspective to that same elephant, that we take for granted. So then how do you create the communication bridge that helps explain our world to other people and at the same time understand their perspective? And in addition to talking about all of these specifically security topics, I think there are a few sessions and demonstrations and booths where we will be talking. For example, we have cloud-based compliance demonstrations in the booth there. We'll be talking about how do you make this real? Because we can all have philosophical conversations. End of the day, people have to get their job done. And, a CISO carries a lot of responsibility and accountability within organizations. And that accountability has to be taken seriously. So how do you make it real? And we'll be demonstrating, how this can be achieved, what kind of metrics are available in that real-time ecosystem. And the beauty of having all that insight available in real time, you can start making decisions. You can stop deployments from happening. You can stop feature flags from, switching on or switching off based on your risk appetite. And you can start controlling the envelope that a feature flag actually controls. So all these possibilities become available. But if as a security and a compliance function within an organization, we don't understand the state of the art and what is possible, we can't possibly guide our organizations in the best way, that meets organizational goals. So it is, I think, very educational from a security perspective, even though it's not black hat. It's not RSA, where we're talking about the fine detail of how can I use machine learning to kind of, determine the latest threat that's kind of bothering everybody, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not purely deep security. It is the application of security to meet an objective and meet an organizational goal and drive customer experience for an organization.
Extremely good point too, because I think as security professionals, we're built in to have an extra layer or level of skepticism, right? And that's resolved or proven by show me, Let me see it.
Yeah.
Let's see how it works. Yes, we can talk about it. We can agree or disagree about philosophies, approaches, etc. But let's see it work. Let's see what it can do and what the benefits are. And is that going to help me in my organization? So I think that's a DevOps World is a fantastic. And by the way, yes, CloudBees puts on DevOps World, but as I understand it, it's a very multi-vendor environment. I mean, you have as well as practitioners, so it's not just vendors, but it isn't just a bunch of CloudBees presentations. You have people from JFrog and Deploy Hub and any number, Deloitte, a good number of folks from a lot of different organizations. So you're going to hear more than one perspective from one vendor. I think that's one of the healthiest things about this conference.
That's absolutely right. And the intent when we set up DevOps World and forever since has been, it's not a CloudBees show. It's for DevOps practitioners, by DevOps practitioners, whether they are on the consuming side, i.e. customers who use DevOps and are trying to adopt DevOps at scale, or they are people who are consulting organizations, the cloud organizations, or other product vendors. It's an open conference. CloudBees probably is a very small part of the entire conference, so it's not just a CloudBees exhibition center. You will get a breadth of knowledge, a breadth of information, and most important, a breadth of real life experience. People who use it day in, day out talking to you.
Fantastic. So folks can go to devopsworld.com to register. There's still space available. It's in Orlando. A great place to be. Lots of other things to do. So you can bring family along with you if you want to, or just go down and kind of focus on the conference. So well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Gosh, I always enjoy our conversations. And this is security and software meeting together, I think is a fascinating topic. And we're all hopefully learning from each other, right? How best to do this and take on those challenges.
Likewise, Mitch. Great talking to you again. And thank you for having me.
You bet. Check out devopsworld.com to register. Fantastic content. We'll hopefully see you there.
This is Techstrong TV.
The great pleasure of being joined by David DeSanto. David is VP of Product with GitLab. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hey, Mitch. I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Very good. Tell us briefly a little bit about yourself and what you do at GitLab.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm VP of Product. I lead our product organization that is product management, product monetization, and our product operations team. I joined GitLab in 2019 to launch our security portfolio, and earlier this year I had the pleasure of taking over leading all of product.
Excellent. Well, I know we're talking security, of course. A new report, 6th annual, I should say, new report of your DevSecOps survey.
Yeah, definitely. We're very excited about the results of the survey, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about them today. And yeah, if you've not seen the survey, you can go to our website and download it. It's full of really great information. Thousands of people have responded. Got some really good nuggets about DevOps, its future, the role of security, and other great tidbits.
Now, I can't say this definitively, but I think it's certainly one of the longest, if this not the longest, repetitive annual survey on DevSecOps. So it's nice to see some of that historical trends and continuity across, the adoption of DevSecOps. So, well, tell us a little bit. I know you surveyed over 5,000 software professionals to do this report for this year. What were some of the highlights? What do you kind of take away from maybe what's similar and what's different?
Yeah, so I'd say the two big takeaways I had from it, one is the role of security and how it's becoming a driver of DevOps best practices. A lot of respondents talked about how security is driving them to a DevOps platform and how that is causing better collaboration between all three groups that make up, development organizations, whether it's developers, operations, or security. Outside of that, maybe the biggest data point was the change in the developer role at organizations. Over the last several years, GitLab, as well as lots of other people in the industry, have talked about shifting security left. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we're shifting developer responsibility right. Developers talked about doing a lot of the traditional ops-based tasks now. This included everything from managing their own infrastructure, instrumenting their code for monitoring, as well as being on call and doing things like IAC to deploy their infrastructure. So that's been a really interesting change. The other thing that really jumped out to me is the sprawl or the tool chain sprawl we're seeing now for organizations. 41% of teams say that they're using 6 or more tools. And that's a lot of tools to try to keep together. And with that, we're starting to see developers talk about them spending a quarter of their time, maybe half their time, just managing the tasks of that infrastructure, leading them to being less developer in their area of focus and becoming more of a jack of all trades. And that's really surprising too with that shift, because now you're taking people who are really, really good at writing software and expecting them to do all these other tasks that are around it.
And it was one of the dilemmas, balance of, I've always had dilemma of, are we in the tools business or are we in the software writing business, right? So you can feel sometimes that you're kind of taking over, especially multiple teams probably have 6 different tools, right? And so you 6 times X sometimes.
Yeah. If you think about that, right, Mitch, like now you've got not just the tools themselves, but it was referred to by Response as a tool chain tax. They're now having to not just maintain 6 or more tools, they're now also having to maintain the integrations between those tools, which can be very fragile. And if you upgrade, say, your CI environment, what if it's now not compatible with your security tools or with your SCM environment? All of a sudden, you're now becoming like a troubleshooter of that environment, having to gauge when you upgrade and what that impact would be.
Maybe it's gone from breaking the build to did you break the tool chain because of some update or some integration?
That's a good sound bit. We'll all have to start saying that. Did you break the build or did you break the tool chain?
Yeah, I used to. We were talking about some of the kind of Friday build days, right? Don't break the build. That's a while ago. But well, I'm real curious. A lot of the sort of debate or maybe dilemma about DevSecOps is, what does it really mean to shift left? What do security engineers do? How much are they involved in the design and the architecture of software, or baking security into the tool chain, or what really is their role as they're shifting left? And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the developer shifting right. So any things that you've uncovered from the survey to kind of give us some insights of what people are doing?
Yeah. So what a lot of the respondents mentioned is that continued shift left. And what we mean by that is bringing the security tools into the CI pipeline so you can scan at code commit time or during a merge request code review experience. And what we saw was that security practitioners started talking about how they're now being shifted left with that and being able to partner alongside the development team to address security vulnerabilities early. One of the things that really jumped out at me was that even though there was a comment about response rate of like developers and security people working better together and more collaboratively, there's still the little bit of the finger pointing where security is saying, well, now we're shifting left. We can see 75% of vulnerabilities are introduced by developers, right? And so, and honestly, I'll say that kind of makes sense, right? If you're writing the code, you're probably the person introducing it, but that is definitely unintentional, not intentional, right? I don't think any developers wake up in the morning and say, I want to write a 0-day vulnerability in my application today. Like, they're not measuring that.
Courses I took in computer science, I don't recall that, but
I don't recall that either. Yeah, I'd have to go back and think that was a long time ago, but go like, was there's like C++ 101 followed by write vulnerabilities 102? Like, I don't think that's actually how it worked. But to your point, I think what organizations are really saying is that they want to adopt DevSecOps, which is trending up again in usage on describing their DevOps best practices. They're going to need to focus on how do we make it so those teams collaborate better.
Well, and it's fortunate too, because DevSecOps, like DevOps itself, can really start with the CI/CD process. That tends to be where everybody kind of, it's where everything comes together, and certainly is a great place to start. You can continue to move into IDE tools and other security elements that can happen earlier in the process. We'll talk about the shift right of developers, because we hear a lot about, platform engineering is now a function, a job title, a thing, right? We also hear, developers don't want to do operations and don't want to do support. They never did, right? So I guess the theme originally was they'll automate it because they're developers and they're doing DevOps. But what is that shift right that you're seeing from the data?
Yeah, so I'd say probably one of the interesting data points that came out and you just mentioned there was 47% of teams are now doing full test automation, including that being leveraging MLAI as part of that experience. And that is a staggering almost 100% increase, almost double what it was last year. And I think that's how developers are starting to figure out how they do shift themselves right and take on some more of those responsibilities. I do think one of the driving reasons for that shift right is that teams are now releasing more often than they did before. 70% of teams are releasing continuously, whether that is multiple times a day, once a day, or every few days. And that's up 11% overall. And when you start to think about that, the best way to do that is to get your developers more comfortable with the things that are adjacent to them to the right. And some of that is, to your point, understanding CI/CD better. Part of that is doing cloud native type strategies and defining infrastructure and having that be part of the actual project, as well as being able to understand, how do I learn more about how my app is being used, and leveraging things like monitoring, data feedback, and ways to pull that data back over to the developer. And so I really think that continued shift that developers are feeling is part of the reason why they see themselves wanting to know more advanced programming languages, and they feel confident they have a really strong position today on how they grow and where they can go in their career. And that number is also up as part of the survey as well.
When we have many more people entering the field, right, becoming developers, we have boot camps left and right, which are all good things as well. I'm curious, as the environments that we're deploying into, I guess is the way I would say it. It's a little more, a little different than that. But we have mobile apps as well as our web apps. We're doing API first type designs where APIs are the product. We're integrating with our own systems, third-party SaaS. You name it, we're integrating with the data sources, et cetera, et cetera. That environment is extremely complex. And it seems to me that that's part of also that software architecture that the developer has to understand of what they're deploying into and how it's secured, as well as the security people. Anything in the data validate that?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a couple different data points that really jumped out. To your comment about the shift in the modern application environment, we see Kubernetes continue to get more and more adoption. And when you think about Kubernetes, you think about defining infrastructure, that's kind of that natural thing that a developer can begin to understand. It's not in the, so I may look like I'm in my early 20s. I'm a lot older than that. And so my career as a developer, my code is being deployed into a physical data center where I didn't know anything about the servers or the networking and all of that. And now today, a lot of that is a lot more transparent. And I think it's what's allowing some developers to build two-way doors in how they structure their code. So that way they know if they need to come back and make something more scalable, they can do that. Or if they need to make something that it is potentially like a microservice, which by the way, microservices also had an uptick this year in the survey. I would say the real big takeaway on them shifting left is the increase in that automation. Developers want more automation. 31% of them said they're looking to add more this year because to them, the biggest bottleneck today is the processes around that. And if they can get that automated, they can move the next task faster, get to the next project faster, and continue to help the company grow.
It seems like if we kind of put different lenses on the tool chain, there is the developer lens. There's also the security lens. We do have a security tool chain, if you will, that's built into that flow. Sometimes it's things outside of it too, but I think that's really coming to the forefront of importance of how we think about this whole process, not as disciplines that happen at points in times or just collaborating.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that's why you're seeing developers, ops, and security teams see the benefit of a DevOps platform. In all those cases that those percentages went up, we're seeing that mentality shift that security is everyone's responsibility. It's not the responsibility of an individual. And again, one of the things I always like to just remind people, and I said this a minute ago, Mitch, but it's like developers don't wake up in the morning and go, yes, let's write vulnerabilities, right? And I do see that with that shift to them focusing more right, it's also, I don't want to inadvertently break my environment. What do I do? Right. And so one of the things that we have done recently to help with that is we've actually added security training directly into GitLab as part of our application. So if a new vulnerability shows up, the developer doesn't need to wonder what it is. They can literally click and take a lesson on like, what is the SQL injection, how to prevent it. And I think those steps as part of DevOps platforms is enabling that everyone can contribute, everyone's responsible for the health. It's not just developers only write code, ops teams only do physical infrastructure, data center, whatever, and the security team just doesn't worry about testing apps in production. And I think that that is also an interesting outcome of the surveys, that ops professionals also feel like they're wearing multiple hats now, and they're needing to understand more developer practices because they're making a shift to Kubernetes. It's at 33% in the survey, right? So I'm now needing to learn how to code because some of that is going to be defined in YAML files and scripts and all the things that I need to know how that works from a CI/CD perspective. And again, same thing with security professionals. They're seeing themselves work side by side, sometimes in the same team now with developers to make sure everyone is more secure.
Excellent. Well, I know you've been wearing your VP of product hat during our conversation, but maybe tighten that a little bit further. A great thing about GitLabs is you're very transparent about where you're going and your plans and information that you're sharing. How does this survey, maybe even this year's survey, inform where you're going from a product standpoint? What are the things that step out to you and say, we may emphasize some things a little differently now, or add a different mix or whatever? How's that influencing you?
Yeah, that's a great point and a great question. So there are a couple of things that come out of the survey that kind of show us that we've been heading in the right direction. 61% of teams in the survey said they're now doing model ops. And for people watching this conversation between you and I, model ops is the combination of data ops, which is your ELT or ETL, so extract, transform, and load of disparate data sets, and ML ops or machine learning ops, which is the productization and operation. I can never say that word.
Operationalization, something
there we
like
go.
that.
So
right?
That's a huge word. I can handle like 3-syllable words. That one's like way too big for me. But of data models, right? So that is testing, building, deploying, rolling back. And we last year made a decision to begin to focus specifically on data science personas because they can benefit from DevOps just like developers, security professionals, operations teams, and so forth. And seeing that that's a trend that's just jumping in that survey, it's a really good sign that we're heading in the right direction. A couple of other ones for you. And so you asked me to put the VP hat on a little bit too tight. So now you can see how excited I am about GitLab and what we're doing. But one of the things that we touched on a little bit ago is we want to focus on more automation. And that's because, again, 47%, nearly double last year, teams are saying they need automation to stay competitive and moving forward in what they're doing. And so one of the things we've been doing is adding machine learning to GitLab. So not only are we doing that first part where we can build and train, but we're using it to make GitLab smarter. And so last year we acquired a company named, we acquired someone named Opstrace last year too, but we acquired Unreview, who focuses on bringing machine learning into the code review experience. And that shipped as a beta a little bit ago and will GA here shortly. So very excited about that as well. And I'd say the last thing that really jumped out is the importance of code review and being able to release code. And so when looking at, from a GitLab perspective, everyone comes together in the merge request. That is your developer for code review, their manager, QA teams, security teams, ops teams, all come together in that one spot. And so we really want to focus on making that a lot easier because that tool chain count is so high. We want to be able to help people be more engaged in having what they're doing. And so if you're looking at this as a whole, for us, it's about improving usability and giving people, whether it's an open source project or an enterprise, the ability to do what they need to do successfully and be able to work collaboratively. Because the last thing for you is that people are releasing software a lot faster, right? And so the only way to do that is to automate, leverage machine learning, and make it easier for everyone to collaborate together.
I think a symbiotic relationship there, right? Automation and moving faster.
Yep.
Not to be too simple about it, but well, it's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that perspective too, and appreciate the openness, transparency that GitLab has, the approach that you take. Well, David, it's been fascinating. Can folks download this report just going directly to gitlabs.com? Is there a particular link we want to send them to?
So the easiest way to do it is if you go to our website, which, it's at gitlab.com or about.gitlab.com. You'll see a link for the survey. You can fill that out. You'll be able to download it and look at it. It's well worth it. And to your last question, for those who are not familiar with how transparent we are, our entire strategy is live on our website. So if you just go to the same website, you do /direction, you'll see where we're heading over the next several years. And that'll drill you into individual components of the product to see what teams are working on it. And of course, our issue tracker is live. So if you want to go in and comment on issues, comment on epics, ask questions, thumb things up, you're more than able to do that. And I highly encourage that. Our product team loves talking to users, whether you are an open source community contributor or whether you're one of our enterprise customers. And so that's the one thing I love about GitLab is we're very collaborative, we're very transparent, and it allows us to have an amazing user base who love the product.
Very true. It is one of the fascinating and I think very positive things about GitLab, amongst others. So thank you very much, David. Appreciate you joining us, and I hope folks will download this survey. It is enlightening. I'm interested to hear in some of the big jumps in the data too. So take care. We'll look forward to seeing you again, David.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Have a good day.
You bet.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Peter Newton, who is Senior Director of Product and Solutions for Fortinet, and we're going to be talking about all things related to zero trust and networking. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Mike.
We've been talking about zero trust now for, at least intensely for the last year or so, maybe two. I mean, it's not necessarily a net new idea per se, but we appear to be getting more serious about it. However, it's not something that you kind of just roll out of bed and go buy off the shelf somewhere. It seems like it takes a lot of time, skill, and effort to kind of first attain it and then maintain it. So what is the challenge in getting to zero trust, and where are we on this journey?
I think that's a pretty good assessment of kind of the state of things. What I see a lot, I'm responsible for our zero trust solutions here at Fortinet, and I talk with customers about zero trust all the time, and I see a lot of confusion. Zero trust sounds so wonderful from a security standpoint, so a lot of people are talking about zero trust, but that has also created confusion as different people are talking about different parts of zero trust. So first and foremost, zero trust at a high level is really a philosophy, a new mindset, a new way of thinking about how to architect and secure your network. And then it's a matter of how do you then bring the right architectures and bring those products to your network to actually realize zero trust. So it is absolutely not something you wake up in the morning and you go shopping for your zero trust and buy it and done by noon. It is much more of a journey. It's a marathon where you start off with an assessment of where you are and then start thinking about where you want to go to next. But it is the type of thing that it is a multi-year journey and really, quite honestly, one that you never fully finish. As I said, it's more of a mindset. So you just always are looking at how you can be more zero trust in your approach, how you can bring those principles of zero trust to your network.
Ultimately, are we talking about some sort of forklift upgrade of our entire network infrastructure, or are we just kind of adding software components to our existing infrastructure, or is it all of the above? It's just a question of when we do what?
Well, like a good lawyerly answer, it's going to depend. It kind of depends on what you got and what you can do with it. In some cases, it's more a matter of how do you configure your network? How do you enable certain capabilities that might already exist? In other situations, perhaps the equipment in place doesn't quite have the capabilities necessary, and some replacement might be required. Right now at Fortinet, we've recently rolled out, well, actually shouldn't, it's been more than a year now, our ZTNA capability. And for our customers who have been using our firewalls and our client for their VPN access, as many have during the pandemic, for them to shift to a ZTNA approach to controlling access to applications, there's no new hardware required, no new software required. It's simply a matter of configuration. So it really depends on both the technology in question that we're talking about. It depends on what someone has in their network as to whether or not zero trust is a disruptive re-architecture of the network, or merely just a way of configuring things differently so that you can apply the ideas of zero trust, which is at its most simple, making sure that only people and devices that should have access to a given asset do have access to a given asset.
And that also includes not just people, right? And we're talking about applications and machines, and everything kind of has identity now, and we need to kind of assign those identities and then find some way to manage them, at least is how I understand it.
Yeah, zero trust, it's a whole philosophy, and it's, ZTNA is one use case that looks at the very common situation of how do users access applications. That's 90% of what people do, and so bringing zero trust to that's important. But yeah, you're right. Zero trust also applies to devices trying to access resources. It applies to, the servers, talking to each other. So the ideas of zero trust will affect, the entirety of the network. It affects users and devices, but it also requires the ability to have controls around those assets. So it also affects the network, the ability to segment and microsegment, so that once a user or device has authenticated, the idea that they only get access to that particular resource that they should have access to it. So, because a big concept within zero trust is you want to prevent that lateral movement from attackers, where someone gets authenticated or gets access through one mechanism, and then they have the ability to run around the network and do bad things. So a lot of zero trust is, we are enabling people and devices to do what they need to do their job, but we're protecting the rest of the network by preventing that person or device from going outside of that particular area or particular asset.
Do you think this will also impact the way IT teams are organized? Historically, we've had, security teams, and there were security operations teams, and we've seen them work a little more closely with network operations teams, and now we're starting to see application developers and DevOps teams take more responsibility for security. As we go forward, how do you think that these teams will be organized to ensure zero trust?
A lot of what we see with zero trust kind of results in the convergence of networking and security, where the security is not a bolt-on to a network, but really needs to be integrated in. As people and devices are connecting to the network, as they're traversing the network, having that security, visibility, control as integrated into the network I think will impact how SOC and NOC teams work together. I don't think we're going to see the end of those two different organizations, but they are going to be working closely together. We're seeing many times that in zero trust projects, you have members of both of those organizations participating in the project because it is affecting both of their areas of responsibility. So I do expect it's going to drive closer collaboration, more joint work, but I do see there will remain distinct reasons for both organizations, both SOC and NOC, to exist on their own.
Will we see machine learning algorithms and AI play a role in this process as well?
Sure, but that's just, and we've seen artificial intelligence, machine learning be applied to a variety of cybersecurity capabilities. Part of the zero trust concept is you want to be doing continuous evaluation of those folks and devices who have access to your network. That's where machine learning and artificial intelligence can really provide that oversight, that analysis at scale for the millions of devices that might be on a given network, far more than what a human could actually monitor. So by leveraging those UEBA capabilities and other behavior monitoring, we can actually detect when it looks like a user or device maybe no longer is indeed who they were initially. Maybe there's been an account takeover. Maybe something has happened. So yes, absolutely. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, in the same ways that they've enhanced cybersecurity elsewhere, those same enhancements will absolutely be useful when applying zero trust philosophies.
To come full circle, we've been talking about zero trust for a while in various forms. What's changed that's making it attainable now? What's the thing that people should look at and say, here's the core advances in technology that's making this easier to implement?
One of the challenges of zero trust, you mentioned actually at the top, was that it is a complex area and it's not just something you wake up and do. What we're seeing is as organizations are shifting towards more platform approaches, it makes it easier to then select a platform that's prepared for ZTNA, that enables zero trust, because for example, in Fortinet's security fabric, we've invested a lot in enabling those zero trust principles for users and devices so that as organizations are looking at how can I bring these zero trust principles into my network, they actually have a suite of products that are already designed to work together to enable those zero trust principles. So the biggest challenge we see in surveys time and time again when asked about why companies are not doing zero trust, one of the top reasons is the complexity of getting all these pieces and parts necessarily to work together to enable that granular authentication, that ongoing verification, that control. But with Fortinet's security fabric, for example, as a platform approach, those products are already integrated to work together. They're already designed to share information, to enable automated activity, and give that broad protection and visibility. So having and selecting a platform is really enabling much more zero trust to be applied into today's networks. So I think it's really that trend towards platform approach to cybersecurity is really enabling the number one challenge of zero trust, which is the complexity of the solution, to really be now available to organizations.
Do you think as a byproduct of that we might actually reduce the total cost of security because we won't be spending as much time integrating all these different diverse point products to try to build something, and we'll have something that, to your point, feels more like an actual platform?
Well, certainly a huge benefit from going to a platform approach and having being able to deploy these zero trust is the reduced burden on the IT organization. And we are aware that right now one of the issues in the industry is the shortage of IT folks who are trained and can support these cybersecurity networks. With the platform approach, it actually enables with the automation and integration that's already pre-done, it actually lowers the burden on the IT organization and making them more efficient and more effective. So, certainly we think that, we see, smaller IT teams that are able to support and provide extensive cybersecurity protection and these zero trust capabilities. Whether or not that's going to be an overall savings, I have to think it will, simply because manpower is a big part of that budget for cybersecurity.
Is this also going to be more extended than it has been in the past? I mean, we've struggled with on-premise and the cloud, and now we see more workloads moving to the edge, and yet we don't have more people. So it doesn't feel like the equation's going to work out all that well for us if we keep expanding the attack surface, unless there's some other way of thinking about this that makes it viable.
Well, I kind of look at it at the other angle, in that one of the reasons that zero trust is becoming so important now and people are really interested in how to deploy it in their network is because they are seeing that attack surface expand so much. We've just come out of a pandemic where we pushed everybody to remote work. Now we're in a situation where we're dealing with work from anywhere, people working at home some of the time, people working in the office some of the time. Of course, travel and coffee shops are always part of the mix. And so there is this increase in the number of attack surfaces. Couple that with the fact that resources are now being hosted, in internal data centers, in cloud-hosted data centers. Sometimes, SaaS has certainly come up. And so with resources being deployed everywhere, with employees working from everywhere, using all types of different devices, that is necessarily expanding the attack surface. And an intelligent response to that is to start treating every connection, every user, every device as if they are an external connection. And that's kind of one of the ideas around zero trust, is nothing is trusted. Just because they're on your internal network, you don't extend trust to it. So being able to apply global policies, no matter where a user is, they're going to get the same type of access. They're going to get the same type of inspection. They're going to get the same type of protection. I think that's, really what's driving a lot of this zero trust. Fortinet's universal ZTNA, as I mentioned, talking about connecting users to applications. We are enabling a much easier orchestration of that global policy than has historically been the case. We've been using our own ZTNA at Fortinet here, and our IT group is really very pleasantly surprised with how it's simplified their life when it comes to configuring all the routes to ensure that users get access to the appropriate applications. Before, they'd have to do a lot of manual routing on the firewalls, but with ZTNA policies, those policies get pushed out and orchestrated across the entire infrastructure. That actually makes it simpler for that IT organization. So to get back to where I started, it's the broadening of the attack surface that I think is really driving ZTNA. And it's, I think, a natural evolution of where we're going. And organizations need to shift to a zero trust in order to maintain cybersecurity in this new way of working.
Do you think, looking back at the way the internet was built and the way we managed networks, that we were just simply too trusting, and now we're kind of circling back to fix that particular issue?
I think that's an absolutely spot-on assessment. As you know, the initial protocols for the network were all just about communication and connectivity. Security was absolutely an afterthought. But I think the good news is we've made a lot of progress, and there's a lot that we are now delivering that are really bringing the integration of security into networking.
All right. Hey, Peter, thanks for sharing your insights and being on the show.
My pleasure, Mike. Great talking with you.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Thomas Pace, who's CEO for NetRise. They are experts in the land of cybersecurity, and we're going to be talking about legislation. There's some pending legislation that I guess Congress wants to outlaw CVEs inside of software in federal agencies. Not sure that's ever going to happen, but Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
What do you think these folks are thinking up there on the Capitol Hill? Do they not understand how software is constructed and it seems to be built by mere mortals? So can we actually ban CVEs, or is it just that we need to have a little chat with them about how the world really works?
I'm not sure if the people who build software understand software or the people who use it understand software. Software is a complicated thing. But certainly, I think the intention is noble, but I think the implementation of a noble intention is somewhat lacking here. As the famous saying goes, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." I think that seems to be an adequate saying here. So I think what they are trying to get to is minimizing the amount of risk that is accepted by the federal government as much as is physically possible. By attempting to eliminate CVEs in totality is at this point, a 100% totally unreasonable mission and goal for countless reasons. I guess some of those would be as long as humans are writing code, having software without errors and vulnerabilities and thusly CVEs is a long ways away, if that will ever happen, which is probably fairly unlikely. So I think that a more pragmatic approach is probably going to be required here, where maybe we say something like, no critical vulnerabilities are in software that the federal government procures, which is also going to be a unbelievably huge challenge. Or maybe it's vulnerabilities that don't have any active exploits available for them, things like that. So I do think there's an opportunity here for the government to adjust the language to make the expectations a bit more reasonable. That screenshot of that language has been sent around the internet like wildfire and has been turned into memes and everything else already. So I'm fairly certain that the folks responsible for that language are probably pretty aware that an edit of some form or fashion will need to occur.
It's also almost impossible to know when there might be the next CVE, right? We have 0-day vulnerabilities. They get assigned the CVE. And I got an application that was deployed before anybody knew about the vulnerability in the first place. So am I supposed to put like timestamps on things to let people know how long my CVE has existed for or when it was discovered? It kind of becomes like, used by this date milk carton kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you do get, there are dates for CVEs, but, I think your point is, once the software gets sold to the government, that doesn't preclude it from getting CVEs in the future. That's certainly true, right? Whenever we used to do a lot of the work that we've built a product for now in the past, one of the big impetuses for starting the company was, well, hey, listen, we're giving people like a PDF, and here is like a list of vulnerabilities. Like, well, 30 days later, 60 days later, that report was totally out of date, right? Because new vulnerabilities have been discovered in open source components or proprietary components or whatever components made up the particular, application or device or firmware. So, once again, it's a good idea from like a gating mechanism perspective. Because I do think there's value in saying something like, okay, maybe we've identified some vulnerabilities here, but none of them are older than 6 months old or something like that. I don't know. Because what we find, especially in the firmware space, is vulnerabilities that are 10 years old, 20 years old, like ancient software components that are being used in brand new products. So, I think there's some room there to put something in there that's a bit more reasonable, like I said.
Do you think, though, that this conversation may expose more people to the flaws in the way that we build software? Because essentially people are taking components and they're copying them from one application to the next. Very few people are writing original code, but they seem to be copying the vulnerabilities that are in the components along with everything else. And Then somebody goes to fix that, but it's actually in a separate branch, and then somebody else comes along and copies the same vulnerability over again. So maybe the way we build software is fundamentally broken.
It's a very good point. It's certainly the case that, you know, you see all these numbers, like 80% of software is made up of open source components, or, you know, plus or minus that, whatever number makes you happy, I guess. You know, there's plenty of great tools, technologies, processes in place these days that do a very, very good job of minimizing the amount of risk associated with like a software development lifecycle. I mean, the tools that people are just using natively, like GitLab and GitHub and Jenkins and things like that, have built-in vulnerability scanning that, if used properly, drastically reduces the number of issues that kind of that can exist and move into production. You're 100% right. There is a significant amount of code reuse that is very, very easy to identify. I mean, that's one of the things that we obviously do, is like, okay, great, we've identified a risk or a vulnerability or something that's been exploited and gone wrong over here. That's relatively easy to do, right? Like that, people have been doing that for a long time. Here's what's really hard to do. If we identified this thing getting exploited over here, where else is the thing that got exploited in the greater corpus of things, right? Log4j being the biggest, boldest, most recent example. But even if you look at like Pipedream, the attack that happened in Ukraine that Dragos wrote about, Rob Lee actually made a wonderful point, one that I've been talking about for a while, is, hey guys, we're happy we found this. It was bad. Here's how it happened. Here's why it happened. Wonderful. But the bigger, more important question is, where else is this software component that was the foundation for this attack to occur? That is something we don't have good visibility to. And so that's I think an even bigger concern in some cases.
All right. Well, you use three words that are among the biggest in the English language, which is if used properly. So why aren't things used properly?
Well, I think there's a bunch of reasons. Time to market matters more than secure to market. So velocity is always going to trump security in most of these areas. There's exceptions to that, right? Like some industries do a much more like rigorous job, like automotive, safety critical systems, defense, things like that. All of these markets have had problems. Like no one's perfect, but some markets seem to do a better job than others. You have the infamous cybersecurity skills shortage issue that exists out there. You don't have enough well-trained people to understand that what kind of decisions they should make. You have an education system that is lacking in terms of teaching secure by design at universities and whatnot, unless you are a specific cybersecurity major. So I keep hearing that that's changing and getting better at some of the universities, but hard for me to know. And then I think you just have, a fair amount of maybe laziness in there, where just so many people have access to these technologies. Some of them do also have an increased cost associated with them for, advanced security scanning features and the ability to identify vulnerabilities and things like that. But I've seen a lot of these providers move that capability like down a tier or two for the benefit of the broader community. So you do see a bit of that happening, which is encouraging, at least.
To your point, do we need to go back into the education system and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Professional Developer, security is no longer an elective, it's a requirement? Because it seems like to me, a lot of the foundations of these issues is the schools never really emphasized any of this stuff to the developer community.
I mean, that was my experience. But the different, like, I went to a program that was specifically aligned with cybersecurity, but even though that was the program I was in, all of my development and programming courses were just like, write data structures in C, write data structures in Java, write PHP code to make this web application work. Security was never an aspect of that, right? It was like, understand how these algorithms work, understand how to design this network stack, understand how to implement these libraries, things like that. It was never, how do I ensure that this web application cannot be, compromised by SQL injection attacks or cross-site scripting and things like that. That's just not what was taught. It was just, here's how the code works, get it to work. Now people can log in and access your whatever, and that was it. So I totally agree that, a broader emphasis on security within the actual, computer science programs and other software development programs and things, computer engineering, electrical engineering, all of those kind of things is certainly overdue.
Is there a hope for DevSecOps? I mean, we talk a lot about it, but I'm not quite clear how many people are actually implementing security into the application development process and shifting left. And then the question is, how far left?
So I think that this problem is, and I say this as a company that is fairly on the right-hand side of the process. We're looking at compiled firmware images. We're about as far right in that development process as you can be for these kind of things. However, I think that this problem is best served at this time, at least, by the security vendors who operate in this space, right? Shift Left, you mentioned that. I mean, you didn't mention that company, but there's a company called Shift Left there. You have the Vericodes, you have the Synopsises of the world. Like, these are well-established companies that do a good job at, bringing to bear visibility to security issues and also remediating those security issues in an effective manner. So, as the saying goes, we have the technology. We have approaches to go about and make a pretty big dent in this space. But here's what I found, even with our company. We'll go into product security teams and they won't have anything, right? In some scenarios, they're essentially the team that's responsible for working with outsourced consulting companies to come in and do assessments on devices or things like that. Or sometimes they are doing some like source code reviews, but they're leveraging only open source tooling for those purposes. And while it's good, I wouldn't say it's good enough. So that would be my thought in terms of like the shifting left. And if you want to talk about how far to shift left, I mean, we already touched on this, but shifting very left in terms of education is probably the place to make the broadest or the biggest impact over time. But for the there's training, and I've even seen a few of these vendors that actually have, and I really like this. Say you have a bug is identified, or a vulnerability is found, or an issue is created, whatever. It's custom per the developer that if an issue continues to occur, like the same kind of issue, like, and maybe it's the same kind of buffer overflow attack can occur, they automatically send them through some automated training that's like built in to the security tool that says like, hey, you keep doing this thing, make sure you code it in this way to ensure that there's not overflows or ensure whatever X, Y, and Z. So I like that kind of, it's more of a holistic approach to DevSecOps, I suppose.
All right. Ronald Reagan once observed that the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. What is your best advice to the government folks about what their role in all of this should be?
Being someone who was in the Marine Corps and then went on to work for the Department of Energy for a period of time and has had pretty good relationships with the government over my career and life, I suppose. I'm generally not a huge fan of public-private partnerships and things like that. They just never seem to make it real far. They're well-intended, but not well executed. There's one pretty specific exception to that I think is worth mentioning, and that's the whole like software bill of materials initiative that came out of the NTIA, kind of spearheaded by Alan Friedman, and is now moving into the like implementation phase at CISA. They've done some incredible work, and they're making actual change. the executive order they put out, I think was what they helped put out rather was made a really big impact and will continue to do so. But generally, guidance, I think here is what makes the most sense. However, the problem you run into is as you look at some of these industries and spaces that have a significant impact on the daily life of Americans, if the private corporations themselves are not going to step up to the plate and ensure that the products and services they are putting out are as secure as possible, then the government's going to be left with very little options. And that's not a great state of affairs. And I feel like that's a lot of what's happened here with the executive order in some cases. And I don't think this was like maybe deliberate, but is maybe like a second order consequence or impact, which is basically like, listen, maybe it's like almost like a warning. We're gonna mandate this unless you guys like get it together, right? And the Colonial Gas Pipeline was a huge inflection point there. Like we can't just have it. We can't just have the state of affairs be that an organization that is responsible for half of the oil and gas being piped through the East Coast is just going offline due to a ransomware attack. Like that just can't be what happens. So, I'm not advocating for the government coming down and over-regulating all of this. At least at this point, I guess would be my opinion.
All right. It's clearly a reaction among folks that are experiencing pain, but may not understand exactly what the source of that pain is. And so they have a sweeping edict and hope for the best. Thomas, thanks for helping us sort this out. And I'm sure smarter heads will eventually prevail.
Agreed. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. I know I sure did. We had a fantastic slate of interviews with amazing industry professionals to give you the latest news. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks for watching. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.